This honorable house is now called to order. Honorable Speaker Maloney Jones presiding. All rise. Please be seated. The House will now admit Proposition 1 on the debate, Homosexuals and the Law. You may take your position, Sandra Smith. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to voice my comments publicly on the issue of homosexuals and the law. One cannot negate the fact that this matter is very puzzling to government, the church, and the public. Thus, in order to maintain sanity for all involved, it is important that we consider the impact of 4 important terms which should be considered when making judgments and the way we respond. These terms are responsibility, tolerance, conscience, and decision making. We begin with responsibility. Inherent in the command by God to Adam in Eden to rule in the book of Genesis, governments bear the responsibility for the security of the peoples of a nation. As one is aware, a nation may comprise of compliant groups who are subject to law and respect the peace, as well as dissonant groups who, for creative reasons or different ways of thinking and reasoning, differ from the established norms, and at times pose challenges of varying degrees of difficulty to handle, as is the case of homosexuals' conduct and the quest for their rights, or I should say, new rights as citizens. We move now to tolerance. The question, therefore, arises as to whether government, the church, and the public should treat homosexuals differently, or for that matter, spew them from the mouth of existence because their lifestyle is abominable, as stated in the Bible in Deuteronomy 23, 17 to 18, and Leviticus 18, 22. There it is commanded that human beings of the same sex should not display sexual behaviors with one another. So a man must not practice sexual activities with another man, as is naturally done with a woman. Likewise, a woman should not practice sexual activities with another woman, as is actually normally done with a man. It is not of God. According to the Bible, what one needs to understand is that the children of God having been placed on exhibition to the world as seen in Ephesians 2:8-10, as symbols of salvation and holiness, need to be sought to all nations regardless of where one is. However, in the same Bible, one sees God sending sun and rain to gladden and refresh the earth so that vegetation can sustain both the righteous and the unrighteous, we all being universal children of God's creation from Adam and Eve. In Matthew 26:51-52, Jesus also held back the notion of militancy of the individual and the church from the apostle who cut off the ear of the servant of the high priest by replacing his ear, the ear of his attacker, and by also preventing the apostles James and John from calling down fire from heaven to burn up the Samaritans who did not receive Jesus on the way to Jerusalem. Luke 9:51-56. Generally, one is advised to keep the peace by both Jesus and the apostles. The citizens of the kingdom of God need to remember that in the controversy between Satan and God, heaven and hell, quote, are not always in parallel relations, existing but not affecting each other, but at times exist in the same arena, bouncing. One just needs to keep his or her side. Didn't Jesus counsel that the wheat and the tare should grow together until the time of harvest, when God will send his angels and expose the difference? Matthew 13:29-30, when the harvesting is done. The Apostle Paul also warns in 1 Corinthians 6:9-11 that among other sins, homosexuals or effeminate, soft and easily used, abusers of themselves with mankind, pose a threat to the salvation of the kingdom of God. However, Paul encourages a tone of tolerance among the new believers, some of whom got deliverance having given up their old lifestyle. Conscience. The three Hebrew young men in the book of Daniel chapter 3, Jesus in Matthew 10:32-39 in principle, and the apostles in Acts 5:27-29 gave a condition of non-wavering faith and obedience to God in the face of objectionable challenge to conscience coming from government and the family in the case of Jesus. This is the only time one sees the spirit of militancy as far as the individual and God's church is concerned. As long as Caesar, government, does not violate personal and collective consciences, let God raise his own hatchet in times of crisis. Our weapon should be prayer and good works. The issue of conscience is not just about the individual. Government and the church are also wrapped up in the business of public conscience in helping the nation and the citizens of the kingdom of God respectfully to develop and maintain moral focus. Romans 13. If government fears God, then blessed be the nations and most of the church. However, if governments do not fear God enough to make a difference, then the likelihood of the nations becoming corrupt and confused might be greater and worse if the church takes unto itself the bribe and filth that corrupt and confuse the nations. Lastly, decision making. Henceforth, governments and the church, as well as the individuals, impact, whether great or small, on the ultimate fate that befalls the nations and individuals as individuals or members of the church and the kingdom of God. Thus, if the issue of the afterlife were not intertwined in the matter of homosexual behavior, then there will be no need to discuss anything, assumably, since humans would basically be preoccupied with the notion of eat, drink, and be merry, because when you're dead, you're done. However, the Bible does not teach such. We must all decide on eschatological or end-time matters. Hence, government, the church, and the individuals are all faced with the responsibility of making fated and sometimes seemingly futile decisions to ensure security. There is one problem, however, by government's decision to make homosexuality legal and grant new marital rights to homosexuals. In that case, I see Caesar or government violating the conscience of the church, and particularly ministers of religion who are resolved on perpetuating the culture of the kingdom of God on earth. Wisdom advises that one should not seek to corrupt the same system that brings cleansing. Order in the house. On this slide, Madam Speaker, I think that there should be a clear distinction among government's protocol and the church's protocol on the law granting marriage to homosexuals. I think that governments should have their own marriage officers and a designated building or setting if they so desire, who are non-aligned to the church of the kingdom of God. Jesus said, "Render unto Caesar, or government, the things that are Caesar's, and God the things that are God's." Madam Speaker, I further propose to government and the legal system that the granting of marriage license to ministers of religion should contain an exemption clause that allows them the freedom of conscience to be faithful to religious piety. Conclusion. The culture of homosexuality is not a light matter that has emerged on the nations of the world. While the lifestyle is not acceptable to God, one cannot justifiably argue that homosexuals should not be treated fairly as citizens. But such fairness should not interfere or undermine the foundation pillars of the Church of Christ, nor individuals or collective ministerial consciences. counsel to Moses in Leviticus 18:22, Deuteronomy 23:17 to 18, and the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 6:9 to 18 should be the platform of our operations when dealing with undesirable behaviors. The fact that Paul presents the argument to the brethren that some of them were homosexuals before they knew God, but now that they have accepted the salvation given by Jesus, that lifestyle should not be found among them, speaks affirmatively that homosexuals can and some will experience the overcomer's life. Christians must live godly, holding their side of biblical principles, and be good symbols of peace in the nation and the church, following the example of Jesus. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Order in the house.
You may now return to your seat, Sandra Smith. This honorable house is now given 15 minutes break.